2 weeks ago, I rushed my wife to the hospital. I held her hand the entire time, signed every form, stayed through the night. But when the nurse asked, "Who should we call in case of emergency?" she didn't say my name. She said, "Call him first. He knows what to do." And just like that, after 22 years of marriage, I realized I wasn't her husband anymore. I was her backup plan. Michael Reeves had never thought of himself as a complicated man. At 62, his life was built on simple, reliable patterns, the kind you don't notice until they're gone. He woke up at 5:30 every morning without an alarm. He drank his coffee black, standing by the kitchen sink, looking out at the same narrow strip of backyard he'd mowed every Saturday for the last 15 years. He left for work before the sun fully rose, steel-toed boots hitting the porch with a steady rhythm that had never once failed him. He was a construction foreman, not the kind that shouted orders for show, but the kind that fixed problems before they became disasters. He understood structures, how weight moved, where pressure built, which beams mattered, and which ones just looked important. You didn't get recognition for that kind of work, but buildings stayed standing because of men like him. And for most of his life, that had been enough. Clara hadn't always seen it that way. When they first met, she loved how steady he was. Back then, stability looked like strength. He had a small house, a reliable truck, and a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. He didn't talk big, didn't promise the world, but everything he said, he followed through on. In a world full of noise, he had been solid. They built a life out of that. 22 years of marriage. No dramatic fights. No spectacular betrayals. Just a slow, almost invisible shift that neither of them could pinpoint when it started. Somewhere along the way, steady had become predictable, and predictable had turned into invisible. Clara changed first, though Michael didn't recognize it at the time. It started small. New social circles, charity events, dinner parties where everyone talked about investments, travel, and people Michael had never heard of. She began caring more about how things looked than how they worked. The house wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was something to present. Michael didn't mind at first. He thought she deserved it. After years of budgeting and careful planning, he figured she wanted to enjoy something more. So he stayed in his lane. He fixed what needed fixing, paid what needed paying, showed up when it mattered. That was his role. But roles can quietly change without anyone announcing it. At those dinners, Clara would introduce him less. When she did, it was brief, almost like an afterthought. "This is my husband, Michael." No stories, no pride, just a label, delivered quickly before she moved on to more interesting conversations. He noticed. Of course he noticed. But he told himself it didn't matter. Because at the end of the day, he was still the one she came home to. Still the one who made sure the lights worked, the bills were paid, the roof didn't leak. Still the one who stayed. That had to count for something, didn't it? The name Adrian Cole entered their lives about 3 years ago. Michael remembered the first time he heard it. Clara had mentioned him casually, the way you bring up someone who's already important before you admit they are. "He's brilliant," she had said, setting her wine glass down with a little more care than usual. "Consults for hospitals, private clients, very sharp mind." Michael had nodded, not thinking much of it. He'd met plenty of sharp minds over the years. Men who talked fast but couldn't fix a broken circuit or hold a structure together under pressure. Intelligence, to Michael, wasn't about how you spoke. It was about what you could actually do when things went wrong. Still, Adrian kept coming up. At first in stories, then in conversations, then in comparisons Michael didn't realize were comparisons until much later. Adrian says this. Adrian thinks that. Adrian handled a situation like this once. Michael never asked questions. He wasn't the type. But he listened. And slowly, without confrontation, without a single clear argument, something shifted again. Clara started looking at him differently. Not with anger. Not even with disappointment. Just less. Like he was no longer the standard she measured things against. Like he had become background noise in a life that was getting louder, brighter, more polished. Michael didn't fight it. Because fighting something you can't clearly see feels pointless. Instead, he did what he had always done. He kept showing up. When Clara's car broke down, he fixed it. When the house needed repairs, he handled them. When something went wrong, anything at all, he was still the first person who stepped in. That was his language. Not words. Not status. Not presentation. Reliability. And in his mind, that still meant something. Because when everything else falls apart, people don't call the most impressive man in the room. They call the one who actually knows what to do. At least, that's what Michael had always believed. Until the day he realized he wasn't the one she would call anymore. Clara Reeves didn't wake up one morning and decide her husband wasn't enough. That would have been simple, clear, something Michael could have pointed to and said, that's where it broke. But that's not how it happened. It happened slowly, so slowly that, for a long time, it didn't feel like anything was wrong at all. It started with small upgrades. A new dress here, a better restaurant there, invitations to events Michael had no interest in and, eventually, no real place in. Clara began moving in circles that operated on a different set of rules, where conversation wasn't about solving problems, but about signaling status. Michael noticed the shift the same way you notice a room getting colder. Not all at once, but enough to make you uncomfortable if you sat still long enough. At first, she would ask him to come along. You should meet these people, she said one evening, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. It's good exposure. Exposure to what? He didn't ask. He went anyway. The first few events weren't bad, just unfamiliar. People spoke in polished tones, laughed a little too quickly, and asked questions that didn't really want answers. What do you do, Michael? Construction, he'd reply. A pause would follow. Not rude, just brief. Like they were mentally filing him away into a category that didn't require further exploration. Then they'd turn back to Clara. She's told us so much about you, someone would say, smiling. Michael would glance at Clara, curious what that so much actually was. She would smile back, but never elaborate. Over time, the invitations changed. You wouldn't enjoy this one, she started saying casually. It's more my crowd. Michael nodded. He didn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. He wouldn't enjoy it. But that wasn't really the point. The point was that she stopped asking. And once that happened, something subtle shifted inside their home. Conversations got shorter. Not hostile, just thinner. Clara began filling the silence with stories from her new world. People she met, deals she overheard, conversations that sounded important but never quite landed anywhere concrete. Michael listened the way he always did, quietly, attentively, without interrupting. But he noticed something. She wasn't talking to him anymore. She was talking past him, like he was an audience, not a participant. The first time Adrian Cole came up more than once in the same week, Michael paid attention. Not because of jealousy, because of repetition. He handled a situation like this once, Clara said over dinner, swirling her wine. Completely calm. Just took control of the room. Michael nodded, cutting into his steak. Sounds like he knows what he's doing. Clara smiled slightly. He does. A few nights later, Adrian says most people panic because they don't understand systems. Michael glanced up. Systems like what? People. Organizations. Pressure. He says if you understand the structure, you can control the outcome. Michael leaned back slightly. That part, he understood. Structures. Pressure. Weak points. That was his world. Anyone who understands structure knows control isn't about talking, he said calmly. It's about knowing what fails first. Clara didn't respond right away. She just took a sip of her wine and said, almost absent-mindedly, Adrian would agree with you, just with better words. It wasn't an insult. Not directly, but it landed heavier than one. Michael didn't react. He just nodded again and went back to his plate. Moments like that started stacking up. Small comparisons, quiet corrections, subtle shifts in tone. Always polite, always reasonable, but always pointing in the same direction. Adrian wasn't just someone she knew. He was becoming the standard, and Michael was slowly becoming the contrast. Then came the photos. Clara had never cared much about social media before, but now, her phone was always in her hand. Angles, lighting, captions, dinners, events, smiles that looked effortless but took 3 tries to get right. Michael appeared less and less in them, and when he did, it felt staged, like he had been placed there to complete a picture, not because he belonged in it. One night, he saw a photo she posted from a charity event. She was standing next to Adrian. Both of them dressed sharply, both of them smiling, not wide, not forced, just enough to suggest confidence. The caption read, "Surround yourself with people who elevate your thinking." Michael stared at the screen a moment longer than he meant to. Not because of the photo, because of what it implied. He didn't ask her about it. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Elevation. That was the word now. Not stability. Not loyalty. Elevation. And in that equation, Michael already knew where he stood. At home, nothing dramatic changed. No fights. No accusations. Clara still slept in the same bed. Still asked if he wanted coffee in the morning. Still lived in the house he maintained. But there was a new distance, one that didn't need physical space to exist. It showed up in small ways. She stopped asking his opinion on decisions. She started saying things like, "I already talked to Adrian about it." And the way she said his name, it wasn't casual anymore. It carried weight, authority, trust. That was the part Michael couldn't ignore. Because trust isn't something you share lightly. And it isn't something you redirect without consequence. Still, he said nothing. Because saying something would force a confrontation. And a confrontation would require proof. And Michael didn't deal in assumptions. He dealt in facts. But deep down, something had already settled into place. A quiet understanding. The kind you don't say out loud because once you do, it becomes real. He wasn't losing her in a dramatic, explosive way. He was losing her in layers. Piece by piece. Moment by moment. Until one day, there would be nothing left to hold on to. The shift didn't announce itself. It didn't come with an argument, or a confession, or even a moment Michael could point to and say, "That's when everything changed." It showed up in something much quieter. Confidence. Not his. Adrian's. And more importantly, Clara's belief in it. At first, Adrian existed only in conversation. A voice behind decisions. A reference point. Someone Clara quoted the way people quote experts to strengthen their own opinions. But then, slowly, he became something else. Present. It started with a dinner. "Adrian's joining us tonight," Clara said casually one afternoon, as if she were mentioning the weather. "I thought it would be good for you two to meet." Michael looked up from the sink, drying his hands. "All right." That was all he said. No hesitation. No curiosity. No resistance. Just acceptance. Because refusing would make it something bigger than it was. And Michael didn't play those games. That night, Adrian Cole walked into their house like he already understood it. Not in an arrogant way. Not loud. Not flashy. Controlled. That was the word Michael noticed immediately. Adrian spoke in measured tones. Moved with deliberate calm. Even the way he shook Michael's hand. Firm, brief, direct, felt calculated. "Michael," Adrian said with a polite smile. "Clara's told me a lot about you." Michael nodded once. "Hope it was accurate." Adrian smiled slightly wider. "Very." It was a clean exchange. Respectful. Surface level. But Michael had spent a lifetime reading people under pressure. And there was something about Adrian that didn't sit right. Not because he was rude. Because he was practiced. Like every word had already been tested before it was spoken. Dinner went smoothly. Too smoothly. Adrian carried most of the conversation, not by dominating it, but by guiding it. Asking questions that led exactly where he wanted. Framing stories that positioned him as experienced without ever sounding like he was bragging. Clara watched him the entire time. Not obviously, but consistently. Her attention followed him. Her reactions mirrored his tone. Michael noticed that more than anything. Not what Adrian said, but how much weight Clara gave it. At one point, the conversation turned to a recent situation Clara had been dealing with. A disagreement at one of her charity committees. "It was chaotic," she said, shaking her head. "Everyone talking over each other. No direction." Adrian leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "That's not chaos," he said calmly. "That's a lack of hierarchy." Clara tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "If no one knows who's in control," Adrian continued, "people default to noise. The solution isn't to participate more, it's to establish authority." Michael watched quietly. Adrian hadn't raised his voice, hadn't emphasized anything, but the way he said it made it sound like a rule, not an opinion. "And how do you do that?" Clara asked. Adrian smiled faintly. "You don't ask for control," he said. "You assume it. Calmly. Consistently. People follow certainty." There was a pause. Clara nodded slowly, absorbing it. Michael took a sip of his water. He'd heard the same idea before, just in a different language. On job sites, it wasn't called authority. It was called knowing what you were doing. But he didn't say that. Because this wasn't about the idea. It was about who was delivering it. Later that night, after Adrian left, Clara seemed energized. "You see what I mean?" she said, leaning against the counter. "He just understands things on a different level." Michael wiped down the table methodically. "He talks well," he said. Clara frowned slightly. "It's not just talking, Michael." He didn't respond. Because arguing about perception is pointless. She had already decided what she saw. And once someone believes they've found a higher standard, everything else starts to look smaller. Over the next few weeks, Adrian's presence grew. Not physically at first, but influence-wise. Clara started consulting him on things that had nothing to do with his supposed expertise. Finances, social decisions, even small household matters. I asked Adrian what he thought. Became a regular sentence. And every time she said it, it carried more weight than anything Michael could offer. Not because Michael didn't have answers, but because his answers didn't feel elevated. That was the difference now. Feeling, perception, status. Michael noticed another shift too. Clara started correcting him. Gently, politely, but consistently. If you phrase it like that, people might misunderstand, she'd say. Adrian mentioned a better way to approach that. Maybe think about the bigger picture. Each comment small on its own. But together, they built a quiet narrative. Michael wasn't wrong. He was just outdated. And Adrian? He was the upgrade. One evening, Michael came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, but not empty. Voices carried faintly from the living room. Clara's and Adrian's. He paused in the hallway, not to eavesdrop, but because something in their tone caught his attention. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't casual conversation. It was alignment. They were speaking the same language. You can't rely on stability forever, Adrian was saying. At some point, you have to evolve. Clara responded softly. I know. There was a pause. Then Adrian again. You just have to decide what kind of life you actually want. Michael stepped forward then, making his presence known. The conversation stopped immediately. Clara looked up, slightly startled. Oh, you're home early. Michael nodded. Finished ahead of schedule. Adrian stood, composed as ever. Good timing, he said. We were just talking. Michael looked at him for a second longer than necessary. I heard. Silence lingered for half a beat. Then Clara moved to fill it. Adrian was giving me some advice about a few things. Michael nodded again. Seems like he does that a lot. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. But something in the room shifted anyway. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. Because for the first time, Michael had acknowledged it out loud. And once something is spoken, it's no longer invisible. Graduation day arrived without warning. Not because Michael hadn't known the date. He had marked it months in advance, written neatly on the same wall calendar he'd used for years. He knew the time, the location, even how long the drive would take depending on traffic. But emotionally, it still felt sudden. Like something important had crept up on him while everything else was quietly falling apart. The ceremony was held at a large convention hall just outside the city. The kind of place designed to impress. High ceilings, polished floors, rows of chairs stretching further than they needed to. Michael arrived early. That was his habit. If something mattered, you showed up before it started. You gave yourself time to sit, to observe, to be ready. He wore the same dark suit he'd had tailored years ago. It wasn't expensive, but it fit properly. Clean lines. No flash. Just functional. Clara had dressed differently. Elegant. Sharp. Intentional. She moved through the crowd like she belonged there, greeting people, smiling, exchanging quick conversations that seemed to matter more than they actually did. Michael stayed close, but not beside her. Not anymore. At some point, he realized he had stopped trying to match her pace. Instead, he watched. That had become his role lately. Observer. The hall slowly filled with families. Laughter, cameras, nervous excitement. Parents adjusting ties, fixing collars, whispering proud words to children who were about to step into something new. Michael felt it too. Pride. Despite everything. Because no matter what had changed between him and Clara, no matter how distant things had become, this moment still belonged to Emily, their daughter. And for a brief second, sitting there among strangers, he allowed himself to believe that some things hadn't changed. That maybe, underneath all the noise, the distance, the new influences, she still knew who had been there from the beginning. Clara eventually returned to her seat, but she wasn't alone. Adrian sat beside her. Of course he did. Michael didn't react outwardly. He simply adjusted his posture slightly, creating just enough space to acknowledge the shift without drawing attention to it. Adrian leaned in, speaking quietly to Clara. She nodded, listening with the same focused attention Michael had seen so many times before. It wasn't the presence that bothered him. It was the position. Adrian wasn't a guest. He was seated like he belonged, like he had a place in this moment. Michael looked forward again, hands resting on his knees. Steady. Always steady. The ceremony began with the usual formalities, speeches, introductions, applause that rose and fell in predictable waves. Names were called. Students walked across the stage. Families cheered. Time moved slowly, then quickly, then slowly again. Michael barely noticed, because he was waiting for one name. When Emily's name was finally announced, something in his chest tightened. She walked onto the stage with confidence. Head high, shoulders back, every step controlled. She looked different, not physically, but in presence. Polished, refined, like she had fully stepped into the world Clara had been moving toward. The audience applauded. Clara clapped immediately, proudly. Adrian followed, composed as ever. Michael clapped too, but his hands felt heavier than they should have. Emily reached the center of the stage, shook hands, accepted her diploma. Then she turned toward the podium. Michael leaned forward slightly. That wasn't part of the standard process. A brief announcement was made, something about top honors, recognition, a short speech. Of course, valedictorian. Michael felt a flicker of something warm again. Pride. Real, undeniable pride. Because whatever had changed, whatever had been said or left unsaid, this achievement was still built on years of effort. Years he had supported. Years he had paid for. Years he had believed in. Emily stepped up to the microphone. The room quieted. She adjusted it slightly, glanced out at the audience, and for a split second, her eyes passed over him. No pause. No recognition. Just movement. Michael felt it, not as a sharp pain, but as a subtle absence, like reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. She began speaking, confident, clear, controlled. She talked about growth, about challenges, about the future. The words were polished, well-structured, practiced. Michael listened carefully, not to the content, but to the tone, because tone reveals more than words ever do. And her tone didn't sound like someone remembering where she came from. It sounded like someone already focused on where she was going. He shifted slightly in his seat. A small adjustment, barely noticeable, but necessary, because something, deep down, had already started to move. Something he couldn't quite name yet, but he could feel it, like a structure under pressure, like a beam beginning to crack before anyone else sees it. And as Emily continued speaking, Michael realized he wasn't waiting for the speech anymore. He was waiting for something else, something specific, something simple, just one acknowledgement, one moment that would tell him whether he still existed in her world at all. And for the first time that day, he wasn't sure what the answer would be. Emily paused at the podium, just for a second, long enough for the room to settle into complete silence, but not long enough for anyone to question it. The kind of pause that felt intentional, practiced, even, like she knew exactly how to hold attention. Michael leaned forward slightly. This was it. Every graduation speech followed the same pattern. Reflection, gratitude, acknowledgement. This was the part where she would look out into the crowd, find him, and say his name. It didn't have to be much, just something real, something that confirmed that, despite everything, he still mattered. Emily smiled. And before I finish, she began, her voice steady and warm, I want to thank the people who made this journey possible. Michael felt his chest tighten. Here it comes. She looked out over the audience again. But this time, her eyes didn't move randomly. They settled, locked onto a specific point, not where Michael was sitting. 3 seats to the left. First, she said, my mother, for always believing in me, even when I doubted myself. Applause. Clara lifted her hand slightly, emotional but composed, acknowledging the recognition with a small, graceful smile. Michael nodded faintly. Of course. That was expected. Emily took a breath. And, she continued, her tone shifting, softer, more deliberate. I want to give a special thank you to someone who changed the way I see the world. Michael straightened, his hands pressed lightly against his knees. This was the moment, the one that mattered. The man who taught me that success isn't just about hard work, Emily said, her voice gaining strength, but about understanding how to move forward, how to think bigger, how to become more. Michael's heartbeat slowed, not faster, slower, because something about the way she was building this didn't feel right. He didn't recognize himself in those words, not the way she was describing it. Emily smiled again, this time directly at Adrian. To Adrian, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the entire hall. Thank you for stepping into my life when I needed guidance the most. A ripple moved through the audience. Subtle, but noticeable. Michael didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. You didn't have to be there for me, Emily continued. But you chose to be. You showed me what it really means to lead, to think differently, to rise above where you start. Adrian inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the attention with quiet composure. Clara reached over, placing a hand lightly on his arm, proud, approving. Michael saw all of it, every detail, but it felt distant, like he was watching it happen through glass. And most importantly, Emily said, her voice softening just enough to sound sincere, you showed me what it means to have a father who truly understands me. The word landed. Heavy, clear, final. Thank you, Dad. Applause broke out again, louder this time, more enthusiastic, because the moment felt meaningful to everyone else. A touching tribute, a young woman honoring the man who helped shape her future. To everyone else, it made perfect sense. To Michael, it felt like something inside his chest had been quietly removed. Not torn out, not violently taken, just erased. He waited, not consciously, but instinctively, for the correction, for the and, for the small addition that would balance it out. Something simple. And to my father. Just those words. That was all it would take. But they never came. Emily turned back to the audience, continuing her speech as if nothing had happened, as if that moment had been complete, as if there was nothing missing. Michael sat perfectly still. His hands rested exactly where they had been before, his posture unchanged. If someone looked at him from a distance, they wouldn't have noticed anything at all. But inside, everything had shifted, not in an explosive way, not with anger or immediate reaction, but with something colder, something quieter, clarity, because in that single moment, everything he hadn't wanted to fully admit finally settled into place. There was no confusion anymore, no room for interpretation, no maybe left to hold on to. He wasn't forgotten. He was replaced. And worse, it had been done publicly, confidently, without hesitation, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Michael exhaled slowly, a controlled breath, the kind you take when you realize a situation isn't going to fix itself, when you understand that whatever you thought you had is already gone. On stage, Emily continued speaking, about the future, about ambition, about opportunity. The audience listened, engaged, inspired. But Michael wasn't hearing the words anymore. He was replaying a single sentence, over and over. Asterisk thank you, Dad, asterisk. Just nod to him. And in that repetition, something final settled into place. Not anger, not even sadness, just a quiet, irreversible decision forming beneath the surface. Because moments like this don't just reveal the truth, they force you to act on it. And as the applause rose again, Michael slowly placed his hands on the armrests of his chair, preparing to stand, not in protest, not in anger, but in understanding. His role in her life had just ended, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise anymore. The applause was still echoing through the hall when Michael stood up, not abruptly, not in a way that would draw attention, just a slow, deliberate movement, like a man adjusting his position after sitting too long. But he didn't sit back down. He stepped into the aisle. The metal legs of his chair scraped softly against the polished floor. A small sound, almost lost beneath the lingering claps and the low hum of the crowd shifting in their seats. Still, a few heads turned. Not many, just enough. Michael didn't look at them. He didn't look at the stage either. He already knew what was happening up there. He had heard everything he needed to hear. His boots hit the floor with a steady, measured rhythm as he began walking up the aisle. Not fast, not slow. Controlled, each step grounded, intentional, like he was walking off a job site after finishing the last task. Behind him, Emily's voice continued, clear, confident, carrying across the room. But it sounded different now, distant, like it no longer belonged to him. Halfway up the aisle, the change in the room became noticeable. People started to register it. The movement, the disruption, a man leaving in the middle of a valedictorian speech. Whispers began to ripple through nearby rows. Soft, curious, annoyed. Michael kept walking. He didn't apologize, didn't step lightly to minimize the disturbance, because minimizing it would suggest hesitation. And he wasn't hesitating anymore. On stage, Emily faltered. Just for a second. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But Michael did. He didn't turn around, but he felt it, the slight break in her rhythm. The moment her focus slipped. Because she had seen him. Of course she had. A man like Michael wasn't easy to miss when he decided to move. Broad shoulders. Solid frame. A presence built from decades of physical work. Even in a room full of polished suits and practiced smiles. He stood out. Not because he tried to, but because he didn't. Her voice picked up again quickly, smoothing over the disruption. Professional. Composed. Like nothing had happened. But the crack was there now. Invisible to most. Clear to him. Michael reached the back of the hall. The large exit doors stood just ahead, metal-framed, heavy, leading out into daylight. An usher stepped forward slightly, uncertain. "Sir, the ceremony." Michael didn't stop. "My part's done," he said calmly. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just final. The usher hesitated, then stepped aside. Because there was something in Michael's tone that didn't invite argument. He pushed the door open. The hinges groaned slightly under the weight. And then, light. Bright, natural, unfiltered sunlight flooded in, cutting through the artificial glow of the hall behind him. For a brief second, the contrast was almost blinding. Michael stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a heavy, echoing thud. And just like that, the noise was gone. No applause. No speeches. No whispers. Just silence. Real silence. He stood there for a moment, letting the air settle in his lungs. It smelled different out here. Cleaner. Honest. Not filled with perfume and expectations. He loosened his tie slightly, pulling the knot down just enough to breathe easier. His chest felt tight. Not from anger. Not even from sadness. But from something else entirely. Release. Because inside that hall, he had been holding on to something that no longer existed. And now, he wasn't. The parking lot stretched out in front of him, heat rising faintly from the asphalt. Rows of cars. Empty spaces. The distant hum of traffic beyond the venue. Normal life. Unimpressed by ceremonies or speeches. Michael walked toward his truck. Same truck he'd driven for years. Not new. Not polished. But reliable. Every scratch, every dent earned. Just like him. Halfway across the lot, he heard it. Michael. Clara. Sharp. Cutting through the quiet like it always had. He kept walking. Not faster. Not slower. Just forward. Michael, stop. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she hurried after him. Adrian's footsteps followed, quieter, but present. Michael reached his truck and placed a hand on the door handle. Then he stopped. Not because of the call, but because he knew this moment was coming. He turned slowly. Clara stood a few feet away, slightly out of breath, her expression tight with controlled anger. Adrian stood just behind her, composed, observant. "What was that?" Clara demanded. "What do you think you're doing?" Michael looked at her. Really looked. For the first time that day. And what he saw wasn't the woman he had built a life with. It was someone else entirely. "I'm leaving," he said simply. In the middle of her speech, Clara snapped. "Do you have any idea how that looks?" Michael considered that for a second, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I do." Clara crossed her arms, frustration building. "You're embarrassing her, Michael." He glanced past her briefly, toward the building, toward the hall where everything had just happened, then back at her. "No," he said quietly. She handled that part herself. The words landed. Not loud, but heavy. Clara opened her mouth to respond. But nothing came out immediately. Because for the first time, Michael wasn't playing his role anymore. He wasn't explaining, wasn't defending, wasn't absorbing. He was done, and they could both feel it. Clara recovered first. She always did. Shock didn't slow her down. It sharpened her. "You don't get to do that," she said, her voice low but tight with control. "You don't get to walk out like that and pretend it's justified." Michael leaned lightly against the side of his truck, one hand still resting on the handle. "I'm not pretending anything," he replied. Adrian stepped forward slightly then, not aggressively, just enough to enter the space between them. "Let's not escalate this," he said smoothly. "It's an emotional day. People react." Michael turned his head just enough to look at him. It wasn't a hostile look, but it wasn't welcoming either. "Stay out of it," Michael said. Simple. Direct. Adrian paused. Not offended, just recalibrating. Clara, however, didn't pause. "This is his business," she snapped. "Whether you like it or not, he's part of this family." Michael let that sit for a second, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Yeah," he said. "I heard." The meaning landed immediately. Clara's jaw tightened. "You're twisting this," she said. Emily was expressing gratitude. "That's all." Michael looked at her. "No," he said quietly. That's not all. There was no anger in his voice. No raised tone. Just certainty. And that made it harder to argue against. She thanked you, Clara continued, pushing forward. She thanked Adrian. That doesn't erase you. Michael let out a slow breath. It doesn't erase me, he repeated. Then he straightened slightly, stepping away from the truck just enough to face her fully. In front of a room full of people, he said. She called another man her father, and didn't mention me once. Clara opened her mouth, but he didn't let her interrupt. That's not oversight, Michael continued. That's a decision. Silence stretched between them. Adrian shifted his weight subtly, watching, calculating. Clara shook her head. You're making this about your ego, she said. This was her moment, not yours. Michael nodded once. You're right, he said. That caught her off guard. Because agreement wasn't what she expected. It was her moment, he continued. And she made it clear who mattered in it. Clara's expression flickered, just for a second, then hardened again. She's grown, Michael, she said. She's allowed to form her own relationships. Adrian has been there for her in ways you haven't. Michael didn't react immediately. He just studied her. Is that what you believe? No, it's not, she said. You don't just walk away from this family. Michael paused, hand on the handle. Then he turned his head slightly. Not fully, just enough. I'm not walking away, he said. A beat. I'm just acknowledging where I stand. And without waiting for a response, he opened the door. The drive home was quiet. Not tense. Not heavy with unspoken words. Just empty. Michael didn't turn on the radio. He didn't check his phone. He didn't replay the speech in his head the way most people would after something like that. Because there was nothing left to analyze. No confusion. No what if. Everything had already been said, clearly, publicly, without hesitation. And that made it simple. His truck moved steadily down the highway, the low hum of the engine filling the silence. The same road he'd driven 100 times before now felt different. Not because the road had changed. Because he had. At a red light, his phone buzzed against the center console. Once. Then again. He glanced at it briefly. Emily. Of course. He let it buzz. The light turned green. He drove. A few seconds later, the buzzing stopped. Then started again. Call. 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 Persistent. Urgent. Michael kept his eyes on the road. Because urgency doesn't always mean importance. Eventually, the call stopped. A message came through. Then another. He didn't read them. Not yet. Because he already knew the tone. It wouldn't be understanding. It wouldn't be reflection. It would be reaction. And reactions weren't what mattered anymore. When he pulled into his driveway, the sun was lower in the sky. Late afternoon lights stretched across the yard, casting long shadows against the house. Everything looked the same. Same porch. Same door. Same quiet stillness. But stepping out of the truck felt different. Like crossing a line he hadn't known existed until now. Inside, the house was silent. No music. No television. Just the faint ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen. Michael set his keys down in the same spot he always did. Routine. Muscle memory. He loosened his tie, pulled it free, and draped it over the back of a chair. Then he stood there for a moment. Still. Thinking. Not about what happened. About what came next. His phone buzzed again. This time he picked it up. 2 missed calls. 3 messages. He opened the first one. Emily asterisk. Asterisk, what was that? Why did you leave? Asterisk. The second came immediately after. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Michael stared at the screen. Not hurt. Not angry. Just observing. The third message followed. If you had an issue, you could have talked to me instead of making a scene. He let out a slow breath. There it was. Exactly what he expected. No question about what she said. No awareness of what had happened. Just focus on how it affected her. Michael typed nothing. He locked the phone and set it back down. Because some conversations don't need replies. They need time. He walked to the sink, filled a glass of water, and drank it slowly. Cold. Clear. Real. Something about that mattered more than it should have. Then his phone buzzed again. Different name. Clara. He answered this time. Not because he wanted to. Because avoiding it would only delay what was already coming. What, he said. No greeting. No softness. Just a word. Clara didn't ease into it. What the hell is wrong with you? She snapped. Do you have any idea what you just did? Michael leaned one hand against the counter. Yeah, he said. I left. That's not the point, she shot back. You humiliated her. Michael closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them again. No, he said. She handled that part. A sharp inhale on the other end. You're unbelievable, Clara said. This isn't about you, Michael. It never is, he replied. That stopped her for half a second. Just enough. Then she pushed forward again. She was honoring someone who helped her, Clara said. You turned it into a personal attack. Michael shook his head slightly, even though she couldn't see it. I didn't turn anything into anything, he said. I just stopped pretending. Silence. Not long, but noticeable. Clara's voice came back colder this time. You're being selfish. Michael almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. Maybe, he said. The calmness in his voice threw her off more than anger would have. Maybe, she repeated. That's all you have to say? Michael straightened. No, he said. That's all that needs to be said. Another pause. Longer this time. Because for the first time, Clara didn't have immediate control of the conversation. You owe her an apology, she said finally. Michael looked out the kitchen window. The yard was quiet. Still. Unaffected. No, he said. Flat. Final. You don't get to decide that, Clara snapped. Michael's grip on the counter tightened slightly. Actually, he said, I do. Silence again. He could hear her breathing now. Shorter. Sharper. Because this wasn't the version of him she was used to. The one who absorbed. The one who explained. The one who fixed things. That version was gone. This isn't over, Clara said. Michael nodded once. I know, he replied. Then he ended the call. No goodbye? No hesitation. He set the phone down again and stood there in the quiet. And for the first time all day, he felt something settle. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. Because the hardest part wasn't what happened at the graduation. It was what came after. And now, that had started too. The lines were drawn. The roles were clear. And whatever came next wasn't going to look anything like what came before. Michael didn't sleep much that night. Not because his mind was racing. Because it wasn't. That was the strange part. There were no looping thoughts. No replaying conversations. No imaginary arguments where he said the perfect thing at the perfect moment. Just silence. The kind that comes after something finally settles into place. He woke up at 5:30 anyway. Out of habit. The house was still dark. The same routine unfolded without effort. Coffee. Black. Standing by the sink. Looking out at the yard. Nothing had changed out there. Grass still needed cutting. Fence still needed repair near the corner post. The world hadn't shifted just because his had. Michael took a slow sip. Hot. Bitter. Familiar. Reliable. Unlike everything else. His phone sat on the counter behind him. He hadn't touched it since the call ended. But he knew it had been active. Messages. Missed calls. Probably more accusations. Maybe even something softer by now. It didn't matter. Because whatever came through that screen wouldn't change what had already been made clear. He turned, picked it up, and unlocked it. 7 missed calls. 5 from Clara. 2 from Emily. 8 messages. He didn't open them immediately. Instead, he walked to the small table by the window and sat down. Calm. Deliberate. Then he opened the first unread message. Emily asterisk. I don't understand why you're acting like this. The next. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Then. Asterisk Adrian didn't replace you. He just helped me in ways you couldn't. Asterisk. Michael read that one twice. Not because it hurt. Because it confirmed something. Not anger. Not confusion. Just confirmation. He scrolled further. Asterisk, you've always been distant, Dad. You don't even try to understand my world. Asterisk. That word again. Dad. Used casually now. Detached. Not the same word she had spoken on that stage. Not with the same weight. He locked the phone and set it down. Because there it was. Clear as anything. In her mind, this wasn't betrayal. It was evolution. Replacement wasn't how she saw it. Upgrade was. Michael leaned back in his chair slightly. Exhaled. Slow. Controlled. Then he stood up. Because thinking time was over. Now came action. Not dramatic action. Not loud. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. He walked into the small office room at the back of the house. A simple space. Desk. Filing cabinet. Nothing decorative. Everything in its place. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a folder. Thick. Organized. Years of planning. Inside it, documents most people never think about until it's too late. Accounts. Insurance. Trust allocations. Michael placed the folder on the desk and sat down. He flipped it open. Every page familiar. Every number accounted for. He had built this the same way he built everything else in his life. Carefully. Consistently. Without shortcuts. At the center of it was the trust. $150,000. Not inherited. Not gifted. Earned. Years of saving. Sacrificing. Choosing later over now. All of it intended for one purpose. Emily's future. Her safety net. Her foundation. Michael rested his hand lightly on the page. Then he picked up the phone again. Scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in a while. Nathan Brooks. Attorney. Old friend. Reliable. The line rang twice. Then, Michael. Nathan's voice came through, slightly surprised. Didn't expect to hear from you this early. Michael didn't waste time. I need to make a change, he said. There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion. Recognition. Nathan knew his tone. What kind of change, he asked. Michael looked down at the document in front of him. At the name printed clearly under beneficiary. Emily Reeves. His daughter. I want to remove her, Michael said. Silence. Longer this time. Because even Nathan wasn't expecting that. That's a serious decision, Nathan said carefully. You sure you want to do that right now? Michael didn't hesitate. Yes. No emotion. No explanation. Just certainty. Nathan exhaled slowly. All right, he said. We can do that. But I have to ask, are you doing this out of anger? Michael leaned back slightly. No, he said. Another pause. Then why? Nathan asked. Michael looked out the window. Same yard. Same stillness. Because I finally understand something, he said. Nathan didn't interrupt. He waited. Michael continued. You don't invest in something that's already moved on, he said. Simple. Direct. Irrefutable. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, okay, he said. Come by the office today. We'll handle it properly. Michael nodded, even though Nathan couldn't see it. I will. He ended the call, then sat there for a few seconds. Not thinking, not questioning, just existing in the decision. Because once you remove doubt, everything else becomes straightforward. He closed the folder carefully, lined up the edges. Precise. Controlled. Then he stood up. Coffee finished. Day started. Same as always. Except this time, he wasn't building something for someone else anymore. He was correcting a structure that had already failed. And this time, he wasn't going to reinforce it. He was going to let it collapse. Nathan Brooks' office hadn't changed in over a decade. Same dark wood desk. Same overfilled bookshelves. Same faint smell of paper and old coffee that never quite left the room. It was the kind of place that didn't care about appearances, only function. Michael preferred that. He sat across from Nathan, the folder resting on the desk between them. Nathan hadn't opened it yet. He was watching Michael instead. You look calm, Nathan said carefully. Michael nodded once. I am. Nathan leaned back slightly, studying him. That's what concerns me. Michael didn't respond, because he understood what Nathan meant. People usually came into that office emotional, angry, reactive, unsure. They second-guessed themselves. They needed reassurance. Michael didn't need any of that, and that made the decision heavier, not lighter. Nathan finally opened the folder. He flipped through the pages slowly, eyes scanning numbers, names, signatures. Everything's in order, he muttered. Clean setup. Easy to modify. He paused on the trust section. Emily's the sole beneficiary, he said, glancing up briefly. No contingencies. Michael nodded. That was the plan. Nathan tapped the page lightly with his pen. And now? Michael leaned forward slightly. Now it's not. Simple. No elaboration. Nathan exhaled through his nose. All right, he said. If we remove her, where does it go? Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the desk. Nathan unfolded it, scanning the account details. His eyebrows lifted slightly. A trade school fund? He asked. Michael nodded. Anonymous, he added. No name attached. Nathan looked at him again. Why there? Michael rested his forearms on the desk. Because someone will use it, he said. Nathan held his gaze. And you don't think Emily will? Michael didn't answer immediately. He considered the question. Not emotionally. Practically. She already chose her investment, he said finally. Nathan leaned back again, processing that. Adrian, he asked. Michael didn't react to the name. Yeah, he said. Nathan sighed. I've heard of him. That was new. Michael's eyes shifted slightly. What kind of heard? Nathan hesitated. Not because he didn't want to say it. Because he was deciding how much to say. Nothing official, he said. But his name comes up in conversations. Michael's attention sharpened. What kind of conversations? Nathan tapped the pen against the desk once. The kind that don't usually end well, he said. Silence settled in the room. Not tense. Focused. Michael leaned back slightly. Explain. Nathan closed the folder halfway, resting his hand on top of it. From what I've heard, he said, choosing his words carefully, Adrian operates in gray areas. High-risk investments, private deals, promises returns that sound optimistic. Michael's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. Not surprise. Recognition. Optimistic how, he asked. Nathan gave a small, humorless smile. Let's just say, he said, if someone tells you they can consistently outperform the market by a wide margin, they're either a genius. He paused. Or they're lying. Michael nodded once. He'd heard that before, just in a different language. On job sites, it wasn't about markets. It was about materials. If something sounded too strong for what it was made of, it would fail. Eventually. Nathan continued. I don't have proof of anything illegal, he said, but I've seen enough cases to recognize patterns. Michael looked down at the folder again. At the trust. At the name. Then back up. And Emily's involved with him, he said. It wasn't a question. Nathan nodded slowly. Sounds like it. Michael exhaled. Long. Controlled. Then he leaned forward again. Then we move it today, he said. No hesitation. No reconsideration. Nathan studied him. You're not worried about what happens if things go south, he asked. If she needs that money? Michael met his gaze. She made it clear she doesn't, he said. Nathan didn't respond right away, because that wasn't the full answer. And they both knew it. This isn't just about what she said, Nathan said quietly. Michael shook his head slightly. No, he said. It's about what she believes. That landed heavier. Because belief drives decisions. Not words. Nathan nodded slowly. All right, he said. Then we'll finalize it. He turned the folder around, sliding a document toward Michael. Sign here. Michael picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of doubt. Because of finality. Once ink hit paper, there was no reversal. No, maybe later. No safety net waiting quietly in the background. He looked at the line, then signed. Clean. Steady. No hesitation. Nathan watched the signature settle, then closed the folder completely. That's it, he said. Michael nodded. That's it. They sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward. Just complete. Nathan finally spoke again. You want some advice? He asked. Michael looked at him. Go ahead. Nathan leaned forward slightly. If Adrian is what I think he is, he said, this situation isn't going to hold together for long. Michael didn't react, but he listened. And when it breaks, Nathan continued, it won't be quiet. Michael stood up, adjusted his jacket. I know, he said. Nathan frowned slightly. You do? Michael nodded. I've seen structures like that before, he said. They look solid until the load hits. He placed a hand on the folder briefly, then removed it. And when they fail, he added, they don't crack slowly. A beat. They collapse. Nathan watched him, then gave a small nod. Just make sure you're not standing under it when it does, he said. Michael paused at the door, hand on the handle. Then he glanced back. I'm not, he said. And this time, he meant it. The call didn't come right away. 3 days passed. 3 quiet, uneventful days where nothing seemed to happen on the surface. Michael went back to work, fixed what needed fixing, rewired a panel, replaced a faulty line in a small commercial building downtown. Routine, predictable, real. And that was the point, because whatever was building on the other side of his life wasn't. On the 3rd morning, Michael was halfway through his coffee when the television in the corner of the diner flickered from a weather report to something louder. Breaking news. He didn't look up immediately, not until the tone shifted. Urgent, sharp, the kind of tone that meant something had already gone wrong. Federal authorities are currently investigating a financial firm operating under the name Cole Advisory Group. Michael's hand paused midair. Slowly, he turned his head toward the screen. The footage was shaky. Camera crews crowded outside a downtown office building. Police cars. Unmarked black SUVs. Men in dark jackets moving quickly through the entrance. FBI. SEC. Michael didn't react outwardly. He just watched. Sources indicate the investigation involves allegations of fraud, misrepresentation of investment returns, and possible misuse of client funds. The camera zoomed in, and there he was. Adrian Cole. No suit jacket. Tie loosened. Hands behind his back. Being escorted out of the building. Not fighting. Not speaking. Just walking. Controlled, even now. But different. Smaller. Like the structure he had built around himself was already starting to crack. Michael set his coffee down slowly. The cup made a soft sound against the table. Early estimates suggest losses may exceed several $1 million. Million. Plural. That meant scale. That meant collapse. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. A system failing all at once. Michael leaned back slightly in the booth. His eyes stayed on the screen, because he knew what came next. And he wasn't wrong. The camera shifted again. More people coming out of the building. Employees. Assistants. Confused. Some angry. Some just stunned. Then, Emily. She stepped into frame like someone who had just woken up in the wrong reality. No confidence. No control. Her posture was different. Tight. Uncertain. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning, trying to understand what was happening faster than it actually was. An officer spoke to her. She nodded. Too quickly, like she didn't fully hear him. Michael noticed everything. Not as a father. As an observer. Because distance changes perspective. She wasn't in handcuffs. But she wasn't free either. Caught in the middle. Not the architect. Not the victim. Something in between. The camera zoomed closer. Her face came into focus. Pale. Shocked. The kind of expression that doesn't come from fear alone, but from realization. Because in that moment, the illusion was gone. Completely. No more polished conversations. No more controlled environments. No more elevated thinking. Just reality. Raw. Unfiltered. Unforgiving. Michael exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. Because this was always how it ended. Not gradually. Not gently. Structures built on instability don't fail over time. They fail all at once. Behind the counter, the waitress shook her head. People like that, she muttered, always think they're smarter than everyone else. Michael didn't respond. Because this wasn't about people like that. This was about something closer. Something harder to watch. The screen showed Adrian again, being placed into the back of a vehicle. Door closed. Gone. Just like that. Years of image. Authority. Confidence. Reduced to a headline. Then the camera cut back to Emily, standing on the sidewalk. Still. Not moving. Like her body hadn't caught up to what had just happened. Michael watched her for a long moment. Because beneath everything, the speeches, the choices, the distance, she was still his daughter. And seeing her like that didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity. Inevitable. Unavoidable. And heavy. He reached into his pocket and placed a few bills on the table. Stood up. Put on his jacket. The diner door opened with a small chime as he stepped outside. Cold air hit his face. Sharp. Real. He walked to his truck. Same as always. Reliable. Unaffected. He paused for a second before getting in. Not because he was unsure. Because he understood something now with complete clarity. The collapse had started. Exactly the way he knew it would. And this was only the beginning. Because when something like that falls apart, it doesn't just take down the people at the top. It takes down everyone connected to it. Michael opened the truck door, climbed in, started the engine. The low rumble filled the silence. Steady. Predictable. He put it in gear, pulled out onto the road. Not toward the chaos. Not toward the cameras. But toward the next job. Because there was still work to do. And this time, he wasn't going to stop what was coming. He was going to let it finish. The rain started sometime after midnight. By morning, it hadn't stopped. It came down steady, cold, relentless, the kind that soaks through everything if you stand in it long enough. Michael was sitting at his kitchen table when the knocking started. Not a polite knock. Not a visitor. It was uneven, urgent, desperate. 3 hard hits against the door. Then silence. Then again. Michael didn't move right away. He already knew who it was. You don't need to see a storm to know when it's reached your doorstep. He stood up slowly, walked to the door, and turned the lock. When he opened it, the wind pushed rain inside, cold and sharp against the floor. Emily stood there, soaked. Her hair clung to her face, her clothes heavy with water, eyes red, not just from the rain, from everything. For a moment, she didn't say anything, didn't try to explain, didn't try to justify. She just stood there, looking smaller than he remembered. Not physically, but in presence. Like whatever she had been holding herself up with was gone. Dad, she said finally. The words sounded different now. Not confident. Not casual. Fragile. Michael stepped aside without speaking. She walked in slowly, leaving wet footprints across the floor. He closed the door behind her. The house was warm. Quiet. Unchanged. She stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do with herself. That was new. Emily had always known how to carry herself. Always known what to say. Now, nothing. Michael walked past her into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, set it on the table. Sit, he said. Not harsh, not soft, just direct. She sat, carefully, like she didn't want to take up too much space. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the glass. She didn't drink right away, just held it. I didn't know, she said. The words came out fast, like she had been holding them in for too long. I swear, I didn't know what he was doing. I thought, she stopped, swallowing hard. I thought it was real. Michael leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He listened, but he didn't interrupt. I thought he was helping me, she continued. I thought he believed in me. Everything he said, it made sense. It felt right. Her voice cracked, and I believed him. Silence followed. Heavy, not uncomfortable, just honest. Michael nodded once. I know, he said. That caught her off guard. She looked up at him. You know? He didn't move. Yeah, he said. That's the problem. Tears welled in her eyes. I messed up, she whispered. Michael didn't argue, didn't soften it. Yeah, he said again. Because truth doesn't need decoration. She looked down at the glass in her hands. I lost everything, she said quietly. Michael pushed off the counter and walked to the table. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Not everything, he said. She shook her head. My job, my reputation, my friends. No one's answering my calls. Mom's. She stopped, her voice tightening. She's losing the house. Michael watched her carefully. Yeah, he said. That's how this goes. She looked up again, eyes searching his face. Can you help me? She asked. There it was. Not dramatic. Not manipulative. Just desperate. Real. The question hung in the air between them. Michael didn't answer right away. He let it sit. Because some answers need weight, not speed. Emily leaned forward slightly. I'll fix it, she said quickly. I'll do whatever it takes. I just need, her voice broke again. I need a way to start over. Michael looked at her. Really looked. Not at the girl who stood on that stage. Not at the version shaped by someone else. At what was left. And for the first time in a long time, he saw something familiar. Not confidence. Not pride. But humility. The kind that only comes after a fall. You want help? He asked. She nodded immediately. Yes. Michael leaned back slightly in his chair. Then he spoke. Slow. Clear. You remember what you said on that stage? Her face tightened. She didn't answer. You called him your father, Michael continued. Said he made you who you are. She looked down. I didn't. He raised a hand slightly. Not to silence her. To stop the excuse. You meant it, he said. Another pause. Then, I thought I did, she admitted. Michael nodded. Exactly. Silence again. Then he leaned forward. Here's the thing, he said. You chose your teacher. She swallowed hard. I know. And now, he continued, you're living with what he taught you. Her hands tightened around the glass. I was wrong, she said. Michael held her gaze. Yeah, he said. No anger. No judgment. Just truth. Tears slipped down her cheeks now. I don't know what to do, she whispered. Michael stood up, walked to the sink, rinsed his hands slowly, then turned back to her. That's the first honest thing you've said, he replied. She looked at him, confused. What? You don't know? He said. Good. A small pause. Because now you can learn. She blinked, trying to process it. You're not going to help me? She asked. Michael didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked past her toward the hallway, then stopped, turned slightly. I already did, he said. She frowned. How? Michael looked at her one last time. I let you fall, he said. The words landed hard, but not cruel. Necessary. You don't learn balance, he continued, if someone's always holding you up. Emily sat there, silent, broken, but listening. Michael picked up his jacket from the chair. I've got work, he said. Routine. Always. He walked to the door, opened it. Cold air rushed in again. Before stepping out, he paused, not turning fully this time. Just enough. You can stay here tonight, he said. A beat. But tomorrow. He let the sentence hang. Didn't need to finish it. Because she understood. This wasn't a rescue. It was a reset. Michael stepped out into the rain. The door closed behind him. And inside that quiet house, for the first time, Emily wasn't waiting to be saved. She was finally ready to understand what it meant to stand on her own.